Hello, everyone. Good morning to you all, or afternoon, depending on what time it is where you're joining us from. And welcome to this ATX InFocus webinar, which forms part of your support towards the March 2026 exams. My name is Martin, and I work as Education Support Manager here at ACCA. And this session today is focused on the examiner's report, providing an in-depth exploration of some key essential exam support resources, such as that report and the Read the Mind of the Marker articles. You'll also get practical exam technique tips and obviously an opportunity to ask your questions live in the session. On this session today, I'm joined by Aileen Edgar, who is going to facilitate this session. We'll be drawing on her experience to provide valuable insights and a deeper understanding into ATX. By way of introduction, Aileen is an expert tax tutor with FME Learn Online, and she supports TX and ATX students. She has over 15 years of experience at ACCA, ICAS, ICAEW, BPP, Kaplan, as well as Learn Signal. And she's involved extensively in student webinars, the debriefs for the ATX exam questions, train the trainer and train the marker sessions, as well as creating tutorial videos on challenging topics in the TX and ATX syllabuses. Some of you may have interacted with those as well. You can read more about her profile in the speaker bio section of this webinar. Before I hand things over to Aileen, I'd like to briefly run through a quick housekeeping items. Now, there are a number of buttons that will be useful to you in this session. First, please ensure that you can see the slide and the media player icons because the content will be showing on those. Number two, you can use the chat function, the attendee chat function, to engage with fellow participants, but please remember not to share any personal details, including phone numbers and email addresses. Look out for the icon that resembles a file. Inside there, you'll find access to helpful materials related to the webinar today, including direct links to support resources. As always, you can move things around your screen, you can resize the windows, and in case you can't hear us or see the visuals, try refreshing your browser, as that usually helps. Now, since you've registered for this webinar, you'll get an email tomorrow with all the details on how you can watch it again. So again, don't panic in case you run into any technical issues, because you'll be able to access the recording later. Just a quick reminder that we will spend the last 10-15 minutes of the session answering your questions. So please do put in your questions bright and early. Use the Q&A section, the Q&A button, to submit any questions you'd like us to respond to. We respond to this as we go, and Aileen will pick a few of those questions and respond to them towards the end. And given the volume of questions that we receive, we may not be able to respond to everyone individually, but we'll pick the questions that will be useful to everyone, and hopefully that should be useful. So having said that, I'll hand it over now to Aileen to run with the rest of the session. Aileen, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. So apologies if you can see a crazy frozen picture of me right now on the screen. I'm going to actually switch my camera off because we don't seem to be able to get mine working properly. So I'm going to switch that off just now. As long as you can all hear me, that's the main thing. So thank you very much for coming along to this session today. So what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the key insights, common pitfalls that students encountered during the exams from the September and December 2025 sittings, because that's what's covered in the most recent examiner's report. If you can understand the mistakes that are highlighted in that document, you can avoid them in your own exam preparation. As Martin was saying, please do pop in your questions into the Q&A box as we go through the session. You don't need to wait till the end to get your questions in, and you're more likely to get your question answered if you get in there early as well, because we do get a bit time pressured towards the end. So I will do my very, very best to answer as many as possible for you. Okay, so let's get cracking then with looking into this examiner's report and what the kind of main things are that we can take away from that. The most fundamental issue that was identified in this examiner's report is candidates failing to address the actual requirement. Lots of candidates were wasting valuable time putting in content that wasn't asked for. So I'll give you an example. There was a requirement that said calculate, and candidates were giving long explanations. It's not getting them any marks in the exam. Also, when you're told not to explain certain aspects, so for example, it came up in this exam that they were given instructions about not discussing the de minimis limits for VAT. Lots of people were just ignoring that and just writing. Probably because they didn't know what else to do and they thought, I better put something's better than nothing. That's not always the case because it's taking away time that you could be using elsewhere. So what do we learn from this? We need to pay attention to the command words. What do we mean by command words? We mean verbs. So calculate, it means calculations only. Explain means written statements. Advice or give advice or advise your client. That normally means a combination for us in ATX. You're normally given some sort of numbers to base your advice on. Also, pay attention to the number of marks available as well, because this tells you how much detail you should be going into as well. It gives you a bit of a clue. So we're going to look at some of the actual questions that came up and how students could have dealt with them better. So in question 1, in the very first requirement, it was worth 11 marks. And the instructions here were for candidates to calculate inheritance tax and CGT for 2 options for providing a son with a gift. Now, the major pitfall for students here that was identified by the examiner was including lengthy written explanations when for some parts of the requirement, the command word was simply calculate or it was state. So writing big long explanations, wasting all your time, that time could have been used somewhere else. Now, another major issue that the examiner mentioned was calculating inheritance tax for all 3 lifetime gifts chronologically. But the requirement actually specifically said calculate the inheritance tax payable as a result of Scott's death in respect of the gift to Liam. So only one gift needed to be calculated. Yes, the 2 previous gifts that this person, Scott, had made were important, but only in that they used up the available nil rate band available on his death. Students didn't actually need to do any calculations with them separately. But I think this maybe shows that students are kind of mechanically learning the rules for inheritance tax computations, and they're not maybe really understanding how to jump in part of the way through a computation. So if that sounds familiar to you, more question practice needed on that area. For the CGT part of this particular question, lots of candidates forgot that option 1 that had been presented to them involved selling a farm before cash was gifted. So they missed CGT on the sale of the actual farm. Finally, the examiner pointed out that there were only a few people who actually stated their assumptions about one of the tax reliefs, agricultural property relief, continuing to apply, even though if you went and read the requirement, it explicitly asked for any assumptions made. And that gives you an indication, well, there must be something. Why would they ask us to write about assumptions if there weren't any? So, lesson here. Answer precisely what has been asked. No more, no less. Okay? Now, let's move on to an issue that loads of students have. Give me a thumbs up if time management is a bit of a struggle for you. Maybe in other papers, maybe you've done ATX before and you've struggled with time management. Give me a thumbs up or if that's something you struggle with. It was a critical issue that was pointed out by the examiner in the examiner's report. So we had this other question, question 2, the first part of that was looking at a bonus versus dividend. And it was 7 marks, and candidates were asked to compare the tax impact of our client, who was called Freya, and about her getting £20,000 given to her as a bonus versus being given to her as a dividend. Now, in hindsight, the most efficient approach to use is marginal tax rates. Easy to know that in hindsight, but in the exam, it can be difficult to spot that. So, things that we want to think about here are, is this person's tax situation fairly straightforward? Are they clearly a higher rate taxpayer? Are they clearly an additional rate taxpayer? Can I just look at the margin? Now, this might be something you've not really thought about before, but it's a skill that the examiner likes to test, which is, can you take little shortcuts rather than writing out full computations every time you have to try and make a decision about option 1 versus option 2? So the efficient approach here was to use marginal tax rate. So it was to identify that the extra 20 grand that Freya was going to get would be taxed at the higher rate for income tax, and that the company was going to be saving corporation tax at the marginal rate of 26.5% on the bonus. And this was all to do with the information you were given about how much money Freya made and how much profits the company was making. Now, doing it the efficient way probably should have taken about 12-15 minutes, I reckon. You'd need to spend a wee bit of time at the beginning figuring out that she was clearly sitting in the higher rate band and the company was sitting in the marginal area between the corporation tax rates. But if students had taken that minute or two, they would then have saved themselves tons of time for this question. But what lots of people actually did was they made up 2 full income tax and corporation tax computations showing the position before and after the payment for both options. That's a lot of things going on, isn't it? And that, I think, would probably take somebody about 20 minutes at least to do. Now, you'll be able to get the right answer under either approach here, no problem. But one of them is going to take up more time than this question's actually worth. Because for 7 marks, we're thinking about 15-16 minutes should be spent on the entire requirement. So by spending a wee bit of time planning, thinking at the beginning, using the number of marks to kind of help you, you should be thinking, I don't know if my approach sounds right here. Is there a faster way I can get to the answer? Have I misread something? Okay, so that's just some exam technique you can take into your exam, calm things down. A minute or two at the beginning, really thinking about your approach can save you absolutely tons of time. Okay. Now, let's not forget about professional marks. We'll talk about them a little bit just now. And so in those exams, I've got a few different kind of examples here, which was specific to the questions in the examiner's report for September and December there. So these are not always going to be the professional skills marks that come up in every exam. These are just the examples that were relevant to those papers. You've got professional skills marks. They make up 20% of your exam, so 20 marks out of 100. And these are distinct from your technical marks. So your analysis and evaluation marks are earned by considering all aspects of a requirement. So for example, comparing both inheritance tax and CGT for 2 options for giving a gift, or thinking about both aspects of partial exemption as was required in the September exam. Please use clear subheadings to show that you've addressed everything. Yes, it's lovely for your marker, obviously, to look at an answer that's beautifully set out. But trust me, markers are very, very experienced. They will just keep looking there until they're confident that they've given you every mark that you deserve. Actually setting things out nicely is more for you than it is for your marker. It helps you plan your answer. It helps you to see if you've missed something out when you go back and read the requirement again. If you just write in one massive paragraph with some numbers thrown in there, higgledy-piggledy, it's very difficult for you to actually bother reading it again to see if you've missed something out. It's difficult. But if you spend a minute or 2 at the beginning of each requirement, reading, thinking, planning, plotting down some subheadings for your answer. You can always delete them after if you want to, But it helps you structure and it helps you look at the number of marks and go, okay, well, I think actually there's probably like 1 mark for each of these 3 things I have to do. Okay, that's going to help you with your time management as well. Commercial acumen marks, they often come from recognizing things like national insurance contributions when they're relevant. So things that are not explicitly being asked for in the question. If you recognize that, oh yeah, there's this other tax I need to talk about, they've not told me not to talk about it, so I'm going to mention it. Also things like thinking about cash flow impact, recognizing that in this particular exam, that gift holder relief only defers tax rather than eliminating it completely, for example. So that's the type of thing you might get commercial acumen marks for. Skepticism. Now, these are normally earned by picking up on statements made in the scenario that are incorrect. So, for example, in this particular exam from last year, we had Karen, a client in question 3. She made a statement about pay as you earn on partnership income. Make sure you're quoting the statement and then you're explaining why it's wrong. Or indeed, maybe they're correct, but more often than not, they're wrong. Whatever advice they've been given or whatever they're thinking is normally wrong. But a very important thing I just want to add here actually is don't doubt every bit of information you're given in this question, in this exam. They will make it clear where they think, okay, there's maybe some doubt about this information. Please do not, if they give you numbers, do not rework the numbers to try and prove an income tax liability. If they've given you it, it's to save you time, unless there's a clear indication that it's maybe wrong, and they will tell you. Now, communication, that's the last one of our professional skills areas. It rewards clear structure, concise writing, using tools appropriately, so using spreadsheets for computations, Word documents for explanations. In section A, you should follow the structure provided in the manager's email in the exam. Most of the time, that means putting to, from, date, subject at the start of question 1. Please don't use your real name, of course, and then using some nice subheadings throughout. And that normally covers off most of the formats you're being asked for, but do pay attention to it. Sometimes you're asked for 2 separate things, so make sure you have 2 different documents in your answer. But that's only relevant in section A. We don't have communication marks in section B. Okay, let's talk about something that people fear, which is their assumed knowledge. Let me just take a wee sip of water, sorry. Okay. Now, in this examiner's report, the examiner emphasised lots of times that TX knowledge is fundamental. Its importance can't be underestimated. There were several questions here that tested TX knowledge in actually quite a lot of detail. In question 1, they were asked to calculate partnership income. The examiner's report tells us that lots of students were failing to deduct partners' salaries before they worked out each partner's profit share, and they were incorrectly treating the salary as employment income rather than trading income. Also, payment dates. These are basic TX knowledge. Lots of people didn't state them, or they were quite vague. We don't like it when people just say January. There's a big difference between the 1st of January and the 31st of January for your client. You need to be precise. The share valuation question. Now, I'm sure you're quaking. Shares, students don't like shares, do they? Yeah, not popular. But they're going to be in your exam somewhere. They cover a lot of different taxes, and examiners know that, students aren't keen on these. So, please make sure that you face up to the things that you find more tricky. But here, common confusion, because we have share valuation under inheritance tax, and we also have rules for CGT. Different rules, different taxes. Very, very common for students to get them muddled up. Employment benefits on asset sales, they require you to use the higher of calculation. Many students got that wrong. So do have a look at common employment benefits. So things like, the accommodation benefit, loans, company car benefit, that type of thing. And this one was the use of an asset one. So if you are thinking, yeah, I feel my TX knowledge is a wee bit shaky, you need to go back and consolidate those fundamentals. The examiner can and will test those in detail. Okay, overseas, another area that students do struggle with. How many of you are dreading a question on overseas issues coming up in the March exam? Quite a few, I suspect. So, excuse me, this question was from September-December diets and showed, yeah, there's some confusion here between tax residence versus domicile status. Now, in this particular scenario, they stated Karen was UK domiciled and she became resident under the split year basis. The question was asking why 7 months of overseas property income would be taxable and why keeping the income overseas really didn't matter. Now, the correct answer focuses on tax residence. She became UK resident from the 1st of September, so 7 months of income from the September through to the March. Those would be subject to UK tax. The default basis for taxing overseas income of a UK resident is the arising basis, and that's why remittance is irrelevant. However, lots of people thought it was all due to her domicile status, or they did some sort of combined residence and domicile status, so general confusion about the remittance basis and when it's available. So the examiner noted, and this is in the examiner's report, the examiner wrote that candidates sitting in March 2026, so that's most of you guys here on the call or watching the recording later on, you should be ensuring you learn the relevance of tax residence and domicile in relation to overseas income and gains and practice past exam questions. So this has got to be on your study list for the last few weeks before the exam. I know some of you are asking, like, what should I do over the next couple of weeks? Overseas issues, absolutely. They could go across lots of different taxes as well. And it's not just individuals. We have overseas issues to learn about for companies too. Do note though, if any of you are sitting in June 2026 rather than March, in Finance Act 2025, there are some big changes regarding domicile status. So sorry for everybody sitting in March. I'm afraid it is getting easier, but not until after your March exam. Sorry. Not good news for you guys, but it is definitely something that needs to go on your study list over the next couple of weeks. Okay, what did the examiner mention a lot in this examiner's report? They talked about question practice multiple times, and they emphasized that its importance again. Well, they emphasized that it can't be overemphasized. So we're really wanting you to make sure that you approach this exam not thinking of it as a knowledge test, but really thinking about this is an application. I need the knowledge, but I don't need to be perfect, but I need to be able to apply. It's not going to just nicely say, please compute the income tax liability computation for this person. It's not going to then say, please compute the corporation tax computation for this person, for this company. You know, that was sort of TX level. That's not what you're dealing with now. And it's not just about doing the question practice, it's about learning from it. So after you attempt a question, I want you to think about the style and presentation of the model answers, particularly where they do a more effective or efficient way to get to the answer. Try to adopt that in subsequent questions. Now, I know sometimes you look at answers and go, there's no way I could write all of that in the exam, and you're not expected to be able to pass. That's okay. Remember, they're model answers, they're the full thing, they're there for you to learn from. When you do miss a point, so you've done some question practice, you've looked at the solution, you've realized, oh, I completely missed something there, focus on how to spot the clues or triggers in the question that you should have flagged. In section A, the important guidance is often provided in the manager's email or communication from your client. So make sure you're not just looking at the wording of the actual requirement. Go and look in the scenario. There's hints and steers and clues all over the place. Now, question practice teaches you to recognise when certain taxes like NIC are relevant. They're rarely asked for explicitly, but recognition of them scores you some commercial acumen marks as well, if relevant. And question practice It's going to help you master your TX knowledge, whether that is from when you studied tax at uni or when you sat TX yourself. I know for some of you that's a long time now ago, but by feeling confident on those foundations, you'll see, for example, how partnership allocations, payment dates, valuations are tested. You'll learn precise conditions for reliefs like gift holdover relief. If you're not doing extensive question practice, you're not going to develop the exam technique that you need to score well at ATX. Okay, so now we've looked at the examiner's report and some of the key things there. What about how the exams are marked and what the marker's looking for? How does your marker make those all-important decisions, which ultimately decide if you're going to pass or fail? Now, how many of you have, as I was just saying, looked at a solution? Or maybe on Study Hub or an exam kit or whatever resources you're using, and I've thought, how on earth did they give marks for that? Or how was I meant to know how much to write there? How many of you have been confused when you're trying to self-mark an answer that you've created? It's really common. But our aim today is to help you with this, because we also wanted to spend some time on the session today showing you an amazing unsung resource, I think, that's going to help you with some of these problems. So you will all, I'm sure, have heard of the examiner's reports that I've mentioned already. You've heard of past papers, practice platforms, Study Hub, all of those things, yes? But how many of you heard about the Inside the Mind of the Marker resources? I would like you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, a yes or a no in the chat box, depending on whether you have heard of Inside the Mind of the Marker resources, yes or no. I'm curious to see how many of you are familiar with it already. I suspect many of you won't be familiar with it, so we want to make sure that you're going to use it for your March preparations. So let's start off with where to find them. There's so many brilliant free resources on the ACCA site for you. Sometimes it can be hard to know where to go, so I've created this little set of screenshots here for you so that you can look back at this presentation, you can find your way to the resource. Now, there are resources for other variants of the ATX exam as well. So if you are looking for something like this on, say, the ATX Malaysia exam, you would just choose the correct exam from the drop-down box. But we're going to use the UK version today to show you some tips. Now, you can see here on the screen that for the UK version, we've got 3 separate links there, one for each question in an exam. And the really good thing I think about this resource, or one of the really good things, because there's lots of great things about it, is that it uses the specimen paper to go through this activity. And you'll find that on the ACCA practice platform. It's also normally in exam kits if you're using an exam kit as well. So these are easily accessible questions and you might already be familiar with them anyway. So what actually are these guides? What do they tell us? They give you 2 sample student scripts, one that's a bit better generally than the other, and then it goes through each of their answers compared to the marking guide, and it shows you why each would pick up the marks that they would in terms of both professional marks and also technical marks. And the aim of the guide is to give you more confidence in answering questions in a way that's going to maximise your marks under time pressure. So once you go into the resource, whichever one you click on, it's going to start showing you the student script. And as you scroll down the page of the guide, it's going to take you through each requirement and the sample candidate's answer. It's going to highlight certain parts of it. It's going to explain to you what marks, technical and professional, would be granted. So what are the markers actually looking for then? Okay, now in ATX, each element of an answer would attract either a half mark or a mark. I know not all exams have half marks, but we do. So half mark or a mark. Calculation answers, they're normally broken down into half marks. Not always, but most of the time. And they're awarded for the inclusion of each single figure, each single rate. So we look at this example that I've pulled out here from the guide. the inside the mind of the marker guide, the student would get 2 marks. They've used correct NIC and income tax rates. These are the correct ones for the time this exam was sat, so don't panic. So 4 lots of half marks there. Now, each half mark is looked for by the marker in its own right. They aren't linked to each other. When you do your answer, it's all linked. But when the marker's looking with, half mark for this, half mark for that, they're not linking things. They're looking for each of them. If you have made a mistake, we have the lovely own figure rule. And that means that if you have made a mistake, the marker is going to recalculate everything you did after that mistake and check whether what you did after that was correct based on the wrong numbers. So that is a fantastic gift. It means you don't need to worry about, oh goodness, I've suddenly realized I made a mistake. I'm going to have to go and, recalculate all my numbers. No, you don't. Just pop a little note on for your marker saying, I realize I should have deducted this instead of adding it back. Great. Now your marker goes fantastic. You knew what you were meant to do. I'll give you the half mark for that as well. You could actually get full marks, even though your numbers don't match up with the solution. Okay. So what else are the markers looking for? Some requirements obviously need explanations. ATX has got a huge amount of marks for narratives and explanations. It's not all just computation. Explanations are typically worth 1 mark for each well-explained point. Now, we don't get a lot of just stating things in ATX, but if you do have to, if it just says like state, then it's probably only going to be worth half a mark, like it was in this particular example here from question 2 in the Inside the Markers guide. There was half a mark available for stating that there would be no tax saving. Let's compare that to this next mark where there's a full mark available, but you can see that you're having to do a lot more here to get your mark, aren't you? You were having to explain that there'll be a tax saving of a particular action and also back it up with numbers to quantify as well. One other thing that's worth just mentioning here in looking at this answer, do you see how nicely this student has set out their points? 1 line per point. Obviously, very nice for the marker, very nice for them to mark. It's lovely and clear, but it's also, like I was saying earlier on, it's great for the student because this is so easy for the student to look back on and go, oh, I missed this bit of the question. If they go back and read the requirement again before they move on, they can spot much more easily. If they'd written all of that out in a big long paragraph with no gaps, very difficult for the student to spot in the exam that they've missed something out or made an error. So think about how you set your answers out and think about adopting more of this approach of, 1 line, 1 point, 1 line, 1 point, 1 line, 1 point. Okay. Now, professional skills. We talked about what those were earlier. They should be evident in the technical points that candidates are making. They're not earned separately. Instead, they're awarded by reference to the technical work that you're doing in the exam. So what we mean by that is you've got these 20 professional marks. The marker will have a list of criteria that they're looking for. You won't know what those are. They know what they are. But for ATX, most of those are directly linked to some technical work. So what you need to do in the exam is not really worry about the professional skills separately when you're answering a question. There's no need to include them in your timings. The marks are going to be given to you for producing answers which fully address the requirements. Of course, in section A, question 1, we have communication marks to consider. So make sure those are the ones that you can kind of try and grab, even though you won't know exactly what they are, but they will generally be around, have you presented your answer in the format that was asked for. So do think about that in question 1. Now what we've got on the screen is from question 3 of the Inside the Markers Mind guide, where you can see that this student, they've written very little, haven't they? Down at the bottom of the page there, you can see part D, and they've got 2 lines. So not only will they have missed out on technical marks, but also they're going to have missed out on professional marks. The marker's having to look at their answer and ask themselves, has this person explained the reason for the filing date? Have they spotted any other potential impact? There was already a professional mark for spotting the more obvious penalty issue, but what about things like reputation, possible compliance checks, and so on? There was more that could have been said, so this candidate here will have missed out on that. Now, my absolute favourite part of the guides is after each answer, it walks you through how the candidate could have improved their answer. And those tips are honestly gold dust. It helps you to see these exams in a different light, I think. I first started marking professional accounting exams back in 2007. And when I started marking, I was amazed looking at the solutions, not from a student's point of view, but rather from someone who's marking hundreds and hundreds of them with a pretty tight marking guide to follow. I wish I had known and understood how they were marked before I sat my exams. So you're really lucky that you've got this resource that you can access. Remember, it just isn't a good strategy to write down everything you know about a topic. I've said it before, it's not a knowledge test. This is a test of application and how you can use the knowledge you have to give sensible advice to your clients. So how can you use these resources to best effect with the time you've got between now and the exam then? So you need to have attempted the specimen paper yourself first, otherwise you aren't really going to make any connections between what the marking guide is trying to show you. You'll just passively read the resources. That's just wasting your valuable study time. If you are struggling to fit in lots of study time, which I completely understand, most of you are juggling this with full-time work, then just do one question a day. Remember, the resources were split down into question 1, question 2, question 3. Once you've created answers, ideally under time pressure on the practice platform, get the solution, open up the Mind of the Marker guide for that question, start working through the requirements one by one, comparing what you've done with the solution versus what each of the sample candidates on there have done. You want to be taking notes of technical areas which were weaker for you, but spot your strengths as well. You want to use this exercise to help focus your studies over the remaining couple of weeks. Don't just think about technical marks when you're doing your review. Notice where you think you've missed out on professional marks and why. Although you won't be able to know for sure in the exam specifically what those professional marks are going to be for, doing more question practice helps you notice the typical kind of things. The importance of spotting relevant taxes, tax reliefs, explaining why you've done what you have, that type of thing. Spot any large areas of the answer where you wouldn't get any marks. Well, why was that? Normally it's because you've misread the scenario or the requirements, so spend some time reverse engineering to figure out where that went wrong. Now, before we head into the question and answer session, I just wanted to pull together some final tips for you based on the examiner's report again. So we've got a summary here for you, key actions that you should be taking. Read the requirements carefully, note where you need to calculate, explain, or both. Check your mark allocations to give you a wee guide on what to do in that time that you've got available. Manage your time, check and see if you can do something quickly with some shortcuts. Don't waste time on information that wasn't asked for. Address everything that's been asked of you. Think commercially. If it's relevant to talk about more than one tax and you've been asked tax implications, then talk about more than one tax. If they mention a specific tax, that's all you need to do. Use the scenario details from the questions. They are provided to give you a guide, particularly around professional skills marks as well. Make sure your TX knowledge is feeling strong. It's just going to be tested in a sort of higher level now than what you did before. Practice your past exam questions extensively. This is how you're going to learn to spot clues and triggers and get better at answering things under a bit of time pressure. Every mistake that was highlighted in the examiner's report represents marks that you can get by avoiding them. So learn from others' mistakes. Use those insights to improve your own performance. Okay, so hope that was helpful to run through the examiner's report there and the read the mind of the marker as well. Thank you very much, everybody who has been submitting the questions so far. Keep them coming in. I'm going to work through as many of them as I can in the next 10-15 minutes before we finish up. So I'm going to have a quick drink of water and then I'm going to start answering your questions. So please do keep them coming in. If you could use the Q&A box, not the chat box, then that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so we've got some questions around, we've got a couple of people I think have put in questions around failing this exam previously, but having been really close to passing. And it is absolutely heartbreaking, I know, to get, 48, 49. And you can really see it as a quite demotivating number. I totally understand. So what can you do differently? Quite often what we find is that when somebody is in the 40s in the exam, particularly high 40s, unless something has gone wrong with time management in the exam, which absolutely can happen to, the best of us on exam day. But if you don't think it's a time management issue, then normally it's exam technique. It's not knowledge. You don't need to be an expert to pass this exam, but you do need to have enough knowledge about every area because it's such a mixed bag. Those of you who've done this exam before know what a mixed bag of topics it is. You can't really question spot. So it's not normally knowledge if you're up in the high 40s, it's normally exam technique. So that can be the time management, absolutely. Some of the things we talked about today, maybe they rang some bells with you. So things like, oh yeah, I just start typing. I don't stop and think and plan. I just start typing everything I know and hope that something, starts coming to me that answers the question. So that's maybe an issue. Not thinking about more than one tax. These could be a few wee marks here, like if it asks you the tax implications of taking on a partner or an employee, for example, as I know was one of the type of scenarios that came up in December. If it just said tax implications, obviously your mind jumps to income tax, doesn't it? But what about NIC? And I mentioned that, and that was in the examiner report. NIC was one that people kind of overlook. And that it won't be worth a ton of marks, but it would certainly be enough to get you across the 50. Another area I think people should look at is ethics. That's something you can practice. You can take Section A questions and just look at the ethics and practice them. There's a handful of scenarios. And you should come out of that exam feeling pretty confident about the ethics part of it. It'll come up in question 1 for 5 marks. So look at those kind of things. If you've never had anything marked and got feedback on your writing style, how you're approaching questions, then that's something I thoroughly recommend that you get done. There's lots of different learning providers that offer that, or there might be somebody, that has been through these exams before you, somebody at your work who can help you. If you've got a mentor at work, or, depending where you work, you might have a system where you've got somebody you can go to who's happy to have a look at it for you. So, but getting somebody else's perspective on it is really helpful. Excuse me. So if you haven't done that yet, go for that. Okay, now another question here is around exam day. You open it up. Where do you start? Do you start with section A? Do you start with section B? Now, this is where doing mocks is really, really helpful because you can actually practice. You can practice doing a mock under time conditions, starting with section A. You can do one under time conditions, starting with section A. See what feels good for you. For some people, their nerves are a real issue in the exam. And so actually starting perhaps with section B is a way to calm them down because there's less to read. Section A tends to have more than one exhibit. You're having to open and close, more requirements. Section B has less to read because it's a 25 mark question versus a 50. So a lot of students do find section B a little bit calmer for them to start with. However, what I would say based on my experience over the last year is that section B can have some little things in there that throw people off, and students have actually found section A a little bit more manageable for them. So what I would say is don't go into the exam. I think it's good to go in with a sort of game plan, but be prepared to switch it up if needed. Now, when you go into that exam, and you'll see this if you do the mocks, is that the front screen of each question, question one, question two, question three, the front screen, before you click on any exhibits, has a list, a bullet point list of the kind of main things you're being asked to do. If you want to spend the first 2-3 minutes in the exam and just go to question one, have a look at the list. Question two, have a look at the list. Question three, have a look at the list. It might be from that you find, oh, great. Question three's got capital gains tax and inheritance tax. I've practiced that. I feel comfortable. That's where I'm going to start. Maybe you go into the exam and think, I want to get the ethics. 5 ethics marks. Question one, I want those in the bag. You can do that. You don't need to do it in order. You don't really want to be jumping about between question one, two, and three because, that's disrupting your flow. You get confused as to who your client is and things like that. But the ethics is normally it is completely standalone. You can go and do that. You won't really need to read too much. So some people like to do that first. So mocks are going to help you practice and see what helps you. But I would say use a couple of minutes at the beginning just to read that bullet point list. So you're not clicking on the requirements exhibit, you're just looking at that first screen where it tells you who your client is and what generally they want help with. I think that's a really good place to start. Okay. Okay, question about can you just use the spreadsheet to answer questions in the exam, even for wordy answers? Yes, you can. Question one does have communication marks though. So you may find that you don't get a professional mark for presenting something in the format that was asked for. Because normally in question one, they'll say something like prepare notes for the client file or draft an email to your manager, to the client, or whatever it might be. And we wouldn't do that in a spreadsheet. So I think a marker probably would say, no, you've not done it in the right format. Now, question 2 and 3 don't have any communication marks, so there isn't anything there. I do think it is better to practice working between the two. I can totally understand students wanting everything in one place, but we're trying to develop skills here, skills that you can take to employers, to life. And that is working between different things and thinking, okay, I'm going to use my word processing as my kind of home base, if you like. And then what I would just do, I would start everything on the word processing answer space, and I would put requirement B. And if I was then going to do the whole requirement in the spreadsheet, because I was only being asked to calculate mostly, but with a tiny little bit of words, I would just say for my marker, see spreadsheet. And then in the spreadsheet, I would put part B, head it up so my marker can follow. And I would do my answer in there. So I think it's good to use the word processor as your kind of home turf and then direct the marker to the spreadsheet if you're using it. But as long as everything's clearly labeled, your marker will they will jump between the two. They will look for where the answers are. So make sure labeling is really, really important, whatever you do. Okay, I think we had quite a few questions about what to do with your time between now and the exam, how to prioritize, what should you be focusing on. I've covered the syllabus, what do I do now, that type of thing. So let's talk about that. Question practice needs to be your main activity. You will learn so much more from question practice, making mistakes, reviewing answers, figuring out, oh goodness, why have they talked about some ante in the answer? What? I didn't talk about an ante. You need to go back and read the scenario again. You're missing things. Why are you missing things? Are you reading too quickly? Are you quite a lot of time I see students will look at a requirement and what they want to know is, what topic is it? Is it loss relief? Is it a trading profit adjustment? Is it a controlled foreign company question? But actually, what you should be looking at is how am I meant to answer this question? Do they want me to talk about one tax, more than one tax? Do they want me to do three things or only one thing here? Do they want me to explain something or just calculate something? That's what you need to be looking for. The actual knowledge, the topic will come, but too many students look and go, oh, great, it's about partial exemption. Great, I'll chuck down everything I know about partial exemption. Something will be right. So question practice is really important, and spend as much time reviewing your answers and then rewrite anything that you've got wrong. It's going to help the rules stick if you actually or retype questions as well. So question practice, when you're making mistakes in your question practice, revisit your syllabus, revisit your notes, your training materials, the study hub, whatever you're using, use that to dip back into. But question practice needs to be the main focus. Does one valid point for 1 mark mean 2 to 3 sentences when it says explain why, or even one sentence? I think one sentence is absolutely fine. It needs to be a pretty detailed sentence. We're not talking about, bullet points here. We're talking a decent sentence. But yeah, one sentence, absolutely. If you use, what my tip would be, to use words like because, so, although, since. Use those connecting words because that kind of forces you to give that extra bit of detail, and you can absolutely do it in one sentence. You do not need to write 3 sentences to get 1 mark. The chances are you're waffling, you're repeating yourself, you've not answered the question directly. We've got somebody here, how to begin a calculation. Once I see the solution, it seems simple. Yeah, oh, I know that's such a common issue. It is about doing more. What I would say, this is a tip that I give my students, which is if you find that you struggle to get started and then you look at the solution and go, oh yeah, I did know that. Just take some section B questions, give yourself 5 minutes at the start of each requirement within the question. Just do some bullet point listing, just do some brainstorming, some planning, some thinking. Don't try and actually answer the question. So don't try and work out an inheritance tax liability or how much loss is left to carry forward. Look at the requirement and just try and plot, what is it I'm being asked to do? Is it just a calculation? Is it explain? Do I need to give any dates? Are there any tax reliefs that I think are relevant? Is it asking me to think about different perspectives? Have I just to think about one client, or actually have I to think about my client plus a company? Maybe it's an employer and an employee. Brainstorm, brainstorm, brainstorm. Do that for every requirement. Go and have a look at the solution. If you're on the right track, if your bullet point list looks like, oh yeah, no, they were doing that. They like I put down that I needed to, think about, do a calculation for them being a sole trader, do a calculation for them being a partner in a partnership, do a computation for them being part of a company. Yep, I got that on my list. They've done that in the answer. Brilliant. Go then and actually type out your answer. Go and do the question. If, when you look at the answer, what you've put in your bullet point list looks nothing like the answer, you need to go back. You need to spend time reading the scenario. What clues did I miss? Is it a weakness in technical knowledge? Go and brush up in that area and then go through that process again. The worst thing you can do is just look at the solution and go, oh yeah, I know that. I will do that in the exam. You won't, because you won't have made yourself actually sit and go through that uncomfortable position of, I'm not really sure where to start here. Okay, so that's my tip on that. A question worth 5 marks, 5 separate answers, so on and so forth. Generally speaking, it's not as precise as that, and quite often we have more marks available in the marking scheme than you can actually get. So it doesn't always work out that way, but I think it's a decent rule of thumb. Oh, here's a really important point. How close are mock exams for the actual exam? They are no indication. No indication. They are at the level of an exam question, absolutely. They are written in such a way as to be a really good test of your knowledge, your application, your time management, Professional marks are valid, all that sort of stuff. So they're a really, really good test for you, but they are not linked in any way to your real exam. Please don't. If people are telling you, oh, only study these topics because that's what's in the mock exam, please don't listen to them. If what is in a mock comes up in the actual exam, it is a coincidence and nothing else. But mocks are absolutely brilliant for preparing you for kind of dealing with the unexpected in your exam. Um, okay, exam stress, really, really difficult. Think about things like breathing, think about more planning actually can help you just sort of just calm down and focus on what are your comfort zones. So that might be the 5 ethics marks, for example. Start there, and at least you know, right, I feel more confident in that. I'm going to try and answer one or two more questions if I can get away with it, because we're running out of time. Okay, sorry, I'm just reading the questions here. Okay. Okay, I'll finish off with one about TX. People have got exemptions from TX because I know that will be a lot of people. TX knowledge is really, really important. It will be examined at a different kind of level. A really good place to start is the Finance Act article for TX. It's very, very, very long, but it is really, really good. If you feel you don't need to read it from start to finish, if you know that, oh, inheritance tax, that's my weak area, go and read that. Use the study hub, ACC study hub for dipping in, do some quizzes, that type of thing. Key areas are things like tax reliefs, loss reliefs. You don't do much of overseas stuff at TX, but you do things to do with residence tests and things like that. Income tax computation, corporation tax computations, capital allowances. Capital allowances don't really get tested in as much depth, but they're still in there, still important. So, yeah, I would do some quiz questions from the study hub. Thank you very much. I'll hand back now. Thank you for all the great questions. Sorry I couldn't answer more, and I wish everybody the best of luck in a couple of weeks' time.